very many perturbations there. Although there is a Birkeland current going in and out of both ends of your planet. In fact, there are likely two of them going in the north portion as we
Oh,
head through our
hi.
poles.
You've caught me watching my own space weather videos once again. Thanks for the reminder to move on with my life. No, seriously, I watch my own videos. Anyway, welcome to the That is Censored, and that is a hole in the ground section.
I would gladly risk feeling bad at times, if it also meant that I could taste my dessert.
Can you taste your YouTube search results and your Google search results going down the drain? Are you sensing a disturbance in the force? Is that disturbance in the force caused by very specific companies, such as Google and Facebook and Twitter and companies like that? Are you experiencing problems obtaining objective search results? Speaking of scams, back in 2016, the average contribution to this charlatan was $27. Does anybody have the stats on what's going on this time around? Hey Bernie, what's the average contribution this time? Please leave a comment, Bernie, if you're watching, and please stop working for the government and get a real job not funded by taxpayer dollars. I would try not to, dunk on Bernie too much on this channel, as it's not really too challenging to do so, as the things he says are, well, brilliant. Brilliant material, that is. Let's talk about Brave Browser. Were you aware that Brave Browser will surf the web up to 8 times faster than Chrome or Safari, which are actually junkware, scamware, spyware, malware, whereas Brave Browser is actual software that will enhance your productivity. Also, it's open source, by the way. And yeah, those other proprietary junkwares are not open source. So yeah, Brave is out there trying to fix the internet. Now, do you follow us on Facebook? I mean on Instagram, that is? Now, we are on Facebook. Oh, there's a reminder. Ah, yeah. Anyway, we're on Instagram also. Have you seen today's space weather video? We're also on Gab, gab.com/smAsho, as well as Minds. And we're approaching 500,000 views, folks. That's 500,000. Why don't you become our next Patreon? You'll see things before everybody else does, such as information about the relativistic electrons. All right, let's start talking about some science stuff. But first, let's talk censorship. Now, back in the 80s and 90s, a lot of folks were concerned about the government censoring us, right? Weren't you worried about the government censoring you back then? There were a lot of people who are conservatives now who used to be not so conservative, or so they thought, right? Don't you notice that going on? A local airhead wonders why so many people who were so cool and so punk rock in the 80s and 90s are now conservatives. Well, it's because, partially, people that are, quote, punk rock, end quote, aren't particular fans of censorship. Now, Mark over here, he has learned how to consume a glass of water. He proved that before Congress. The question is, when is he going to learn how to write software? Now, I know, you're going to comment and say, but Mark is a programmer. That's how Facebook got started. Rah, 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 rah. And while that's true, Mark has set aside his programming skills to become a great CEO, and indeed a legend in his own mind. Anyway, so who needs the government when big tech like Google and Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and all those great companies that give you all this free stuff? You see a theme developing here, folks. It's all free. The Facebook software, it's free. Your time is free for them to waste. All right, let's talk more interesting stuff here, like the new high-mass gamma-ray binary that got discovered. They're the transients. It's got a pretty funky periodicity here. The periodicity is, I think it's 11 days, 13.7 days. So, interesting article. We've got links to it in the description. And by the way, if you're viewing this via Patreon, you're the few, the proud, the people that get to see this several hours before everybody else. If you haven't already read up about it, here, let me display the whole thing on the screen for you, so you can just pause and unpause and just read the article without even leaving this video. Anyway, it's a rapidly rotating high-mass gamma-ray binary. Enough said about that. If you want to look at some of the funkier items that are being monitored all the time at the Neil Gorell Swift Observatory, well, check the description below the video. There's a link to that also. We look at certain transients on here, Milky Way galaxy team, as I'm sure you're well aware. So, let's consider some possibilities here. Let's take a look at these three objects, which I would consider this the west of the galaxy, due to the way things rotate. But in any case, let's call this the west. We're going to look at the Crab Nebula, Gaminga, and Vela Pulsar. So here back at Neil Gorell Swift Observatory, type in Crab. And there's a couple things on Crab because it's such a reference point. And here are the transients from the crabbiest of nebula. Get the full date stamps there. Anyway, the blue one is the interesting one here, as we see transients are gone here for a period. We did see some errors in this system a little while ago, but we do see very low levels here. So, anyway, that's the Crab. Next we'll look at Gaminga and then Vela Pulsar. There are the transients from that. And these are days of 2019, so this is a recent scenario here. This must be data loss. I highly doubt both of those, both the Crab Nebula and the Pulsar turned off at the same time. Let's look at Vela Pulsar. And there are the transients from that. Now, let's look at the more interesting stuff in the east. First, we're going to look at this one, Blazar 3C454.3. I know it's a catchy name, right? This is the most luminous object ever imaged. And there are the transients from that Blazar there, located south of the Cygnus arm. And this is a small satellite galaxy, which we're looking right down the barrel of its Z field. An interesting break in the transients over there. It's probably just data loss, folks. If you want to email the Neil Gorell Swift Observatory, go right ahead. They're quite nice, and they'll get back to you quickly. Moving on. And we're going to look at two objects here in the Cygnus arm, and this is located right about here. This is one within the galaxy and one 500 to 700 million light years away. Back to Neil Gorell Swift Observatory. The Burst Alert Telescope, if you're wondering what the BAT stands for, it's the BAT telescope, folks. The Burst Alert Telescope, measuring X-rays. 3C405.0, otherwise known as Cygnus A, the massive radio galaxy. If you don't know about that, read up on it. Do a web search. Read up on Cygnus A, the massive radio galaxy, and you'll be impressed. Now, this thing is located about between 500 and 700 million light years away. And it's the second most powerful radio source in the entire sky, second only to your local yellow dwarf. Anyway, there are the transients from that, and we see quite a dense outburst there in the past. It looks like a ramp up over the past 2 weeks, assuming that this data breach, data loss, is data loss, and I'm quite sure that it is. Let's look at one more object. Going to look at Cygnus X3. Otherwise known as the star Deneb, the tail of the swan, and the other North Pole. In other words, Polaris's precessional counterpart, Deneb. it's becoming more and more apparent that things like pyramids and Göbekli Tepe are pointed at this star and not at Orion's belt or whatever people seem to think these things were oriented toward. And there are the transients from that. And notice a similar ramp up from there as we see from Cygnus A. Now this is a star, a Wolf-Rayet star being orbited by a, quote, neutron star or some other high mass object at a very, very high speed. Periodicity is only 4.83 hours on this high mass X-ray binary. If you don't know about Deneb, it's one of the weirdest things and one of the most likely sources of highly charged cosmic ray type particles. In other words, if there is a point source in the sky, it is this point source, Deneb. And the history of this thing goes all the way back to a mountain underneath Minnesota with the first cosmic ray detector, which was picking up this 4.83 hour periodicity. And you want to talk about a weird, creepy object. Cygnus X3 is the weirdest, creepiest object in our galaxy. If you weren't aware, you heard it here first. If you're in the northern hemisphere, it's most assuredly sending protons through your head nearly all the time, all summer. Moving on. I wanted to refer you to the Wikipedia article about stellar classification, as the high mass gamma ray binary that we're talking about is believed to be an O-class star, which is the craziest star of all. I mean, it's a hypergiant type star with an ultra-massive object orbiting it at that periodicity of 13.7 days. So this is a very interesting object, to say the least, and we've got links to this Wikipedia article about star classification. Stars are classified by apparent size and by intensity and by the spectra, if you were wondering about the way stars are classified. If you didn't know, just read the article. It's pretty mainstream astronomy here, and I don't want to get too in-depth into it, as those are weeds I don't intend to wade into at this moment. How about these new photos of M81? Check it out, Cosmos magazine. M81 with the infrared spectrum from Messier object number 81. One of my personal favorite galaxy pictures. Good times. I'll just leave that on the screen so you can screenshot it if you like. Oh, and it's time for the bonus section, as this video is complete. Looking at the sun the last 11 hours and 45 minutes in 193 angstroms. Hey, check it out. There's a coronal hole actually advancing south out of that North Pole coronal hole there. An indication that it could be growing, not shrinking. Anyway, folks, thanks for tuning in. And remember, when you're being censored, don't drink. And if you drink, don't be censored. And since it'll never be now again, may the censorship be in your past and the freedom to do what you want in your near future.